Joining us now, former Labor Secretary under President Clinton, Robert Reich. And Secretary Reich, your latest Substack post focuses on Trump's tariff battle with Canada, Mexico, and China. And it's entitled What You Need to Know About Trump's Tariffs and the Rest of Trump's Madness. And you write in part this: the real reason Trump has raised tariffs on Canada and Mexico is to show the world that he is willing to harm smaller economies, even at the cost of harming America's very large economy. The point is the show, so the world knows it's dealing with someone who's willing to mete out big punishments. Trump increasing his power by demonstrating he has the power and is willing to use it. You go on to write, look behind what's happening and you'll see that Trump is employing two techniques to gain more power than any U.S. president has ever wielded. The first is to demonstrate that he can mete out huge punishments and rewards. The second technique Trump is using to expand his power: unpredictability. A lot of that we saw in his first administration, but of course, sir, this administration, this incoming administration, and potentially the cabinet nominees as they get put through the Senate, they are prepared to make sure that Trump is successful in what he wants to do. And so I'm curious, beyond what we need to know, which you laid out perfectly here, what it is for those who are concerned about the immediate destructive nature of this to our government can anyone do?
Mika, first of all, good morning. Secondly, in terms of what we can do between now and the midterm elections of 2026, there's not a great deal. I mean, presidents do have some authority and some power, obviously, a separate branch of government. He was elected, even though it was a squeaker of an election, 1.5% of Americans in terms of that margin. But I think it's very important, if Americans are concerned about our democracy, and I think you should be concerned, to write your members of Congress, to make as loud a noise as possible. If you are a Democratic lawmaker, it's very important for you to stand up for democracy and for the prerogatives that the Constitution gives Congress in terms of making laws, and the power of the purse, and everything else that we've come to take for granted. I mean, Donald Trump is a bully, and what he's trying to do is bully everybody. I mean, what does a bully do? A bully picks on his weakest and most dependent neighbors, for example, Canada, Mexico, Denmark, with regard to, we threatened to buy Greenland. I mean, this is all crazy talk, but we have come to expect it from Trump, and many world leaders now say, well, we're worried because we don't know what he's going to do next, so let's give him a very wide berth and see what happens.
So, Mr. Secretary, good morning. Let's speak a little further about the implications and ramifications of these tariffs, not just economically. Obviously, they're paused, but if they were to return, let's say in 30 days' time, but also the strain it puts on alliances. I mean, you just sort of hinted at it. Both of these countries, our nearest neighbors, Prime Minister Trudeau of Canada over the weekend, talking about the real sense of betrayal that he and his people felt when Trump announced the tariffs would be put in place. These leaders perhaps might be moved to reevaluate their relationships with the United States and seek comfort elsewhere.
I think Canada is not only our most important ally in many, many respects, and our neighbor, but we rely on Canada. We've always relied on Canada, and Canada is very dependent on us. Many Canadians are, just like many Mexicans, I'm assuming, are reevaluating their view of the United States and Americans generally. I mean, can we rely, they say, on this gigantic kind of force, either to our south or to our north, in terms of relying on their rationale, relying on their reasonableness, relying on their friendship. And again, the bullying techniques used by Trump are undermining very, very long, very, very important established relationships.
So, Mr. Secretary, what would that reevaluation look like in practice in terms of both imports and exports for, say, a country like Canada or Mexico? What are the alternative markets that they could develop to potentially replace or at least supplement the United States? Do they exist, those markets?
Well, there are very important markets around the world. Trump is talking about his next target being Europe and slapping big tariffs on Europe. Well, the potential trade between Canada and Europe and Mexico, already very significant, could get much larger. One of the big beneficiaries here that's not being talked about is China. China would like nothing better than to have Canada and Mexico and Europe and the European Union all battling the United States, because that would give an opening to China. Southeast Asia, where many of the goods that are coming into the United States and are going to Canada and Mexico and Europe originate from, Southeast Asia is a major player here as well, and I'm sure is reevaluating the trade routes and the trade relationships.
So these tariff wars will continue, perhaps branch out, and what are your predictions / concerns about the impact on the health of the U.S. economy?
Well, it's not only the health of the U.S. economy, it's the health of Americans. I mean, the fundamental issue here is not only jobs, it's wages, it's Americans' access to the kind of medications we need around the world. It's the problem of prices. My worry here ultimately is that in terms of Trump's drive to show himself as very powerful, that nobody can stop him, that he is the bully of bullies, he is going to increase prices. I mean, tariffs are essentially, as we now are learning, as most people know, taxes. They increase the costs of goods coming into the United States. A lot of Americans are going to be paying much more, or could be paying much more. A lot of the suppliers to many of our companies are getting nervous, are already raising prices even as we speak. It's not just the stock market. I'm talking about really jobs, wages, and prices. The basics in terms of our economy. A lot of people could be very hurt, and some people are being very hurt right now.
Seeing it already. Yeah. Former U.S. Labor Secretary Robert Reich, thank you very much for coming on this morning. We appreciate it. See you soon.